Hi. Now this is a prop. I'm going to come back to that later on. I'm going to come back to that. So what I want to do now is to take you into the future. I think you're all pretty much warmed up. And I want to take you to 2050. And I am very fortunate because I've spent the last 5 years going to 25 countries discussing how we're going to achieve a sustainable lifestyle in 2050. Now, if you're around 25, in 2050 you're going to be the same age as me. So just imagine your life to get to my age, and there are two different directions we can go in. And one really worrying thing with 9 billion people on the planet is that if we keep living the way we are at the moment, we're going to be in serious trouble. So what I want to do now is to say to you, you have the opportunity to actually make a difference and change the direction for the better. So after this little 15 to 20 minute presentation, I hope you'll come away with some ideas about what you can do next week and some ideas about what you can do to influence your friends and your family going forward after that. So that's what I'm hoping to achieve. So basically, what are the problems? Well, basically, we've got some big drivers for change. And in my company, Arup, we've been studying these drivers for change. And we've been realizing that waste is a massive problem. We're digging things out of the ground, we're using them, and we're putting waste into the ground, and we're not closing those loops. Then we have the whole issue of demographics, of population growth, which means that as more and more people are on the planet, they need more and more resources. We have the whole issue of climate change, which I'm going to talk briefly about, and can we capture carbon and sequester it back into the land? We've got the problem of supply of water and many, many other drivers for change. So what I'm going to do now is to say, think about this beautiful planet. Go outside it, look in on it. What happens? The sun shines on it, but nothing else comes out. It's closed. It's a closed system. All that happens is that plants grow, they absorb carbon dioxide, and they create carbon which gets stored on the planet. Did you know that every year now we're using 1 million years of stored carbon? We're burning it, we're using oil, gas, and coal. Every year, 1 million years of stored carbon is being thrown into the atmosphere. And that is basically warming the planet really quickly. Now, here in Hong Kong, we had a climate conference just before Christmas when people said, do you know there's a 50% probability now of human catastrophe around 2070, 2080, when you'll be in your sort of late 80s or 90s. And human catastrophe means severe floods, very high temperatures, conditions on the planet that will be pretty much intolerable for many people. And I don't want that to happen. I hope you don't want it to happen either. And therefore, what can we do about it? And that's really what I'm going to talk about. And it's living in cities that actually is the main issue. So what can we do with our cities and the way we live to make a difference to that problem, change the trajectory? Now, another big problem is that in addition to that climate change impact, we're also, because we have 9 billion people in 2050, the average amount of land that we're going to have to support everyone's life is going down as the population grows because the Earth isn't getting bigger. So 100 years ago, we had about 8 hectares of land to support our life, to give us energy, water, to absorb waste, and to provide our food. Today, we've only got 2 hectares each, and by 2050, we'll only have 1.5. And we're living actually in a lifestyle where we don't care about that. We use more and more, not less and less. And so unless we change that, we're going to run out of resources, they're going to get too expensive, and we'll get inflation and economic problems. So basically cities, and you've already seen Hong Kong has a ecological footprint, it's called, of around 4 hectares per person, which has been in the paper today, the WWF report, which means in Hong Kong you're consuming about 2 planets worth of resources. But you can see in the rest of the world, actually you're not so bad, because in Europe it's 2 or 3 planets, and in the United States it's 5 or 6 planets worth of resources. And that can't go on, can it? It's obvious that we've got to do something different. So basically what I've done is said we've got to reach a condition, what I call the ecological age of living, away from the industrial age, when we dramatically reduce carbon emissions by an average of 50% by 2050 across the whole world. We get to an ecological footprint on average for each of us of about 1.5 hectares per person. And the really good news about that is we'll have more money and resources available to lift human development in line with the Millennium Development Goals. And generally that means we'll have more money for education for our children and to provide healthcare. So actually this is a very positive story if we can make it happen. We have been doing some work in China on designing cities that could meet these aspirations. And very quickly, I just wanted to show you this, which just illustrates the sort of things that can be done in cities to make life better. So the first thing is to actually bring ecology and the natural world into cities and grow food in them. And basically, we can do that by bringing wetlands and natural systems and ecology into cities to sequester carbon and to provide a much more attractive lifestyle. We can then manage our water. We can collect it. We can prevent flooding by allowing water to soak into the land. And we can use it for recreation. We can use it for our potable water and for growing food in cities. And then we can have good public transport. Instead of living way away from where you work and finding you have to use a car, you can have good public transport. So you can have lovely spaces within the city with water. You can walk and cycle and use good public transport. Then you can actually have the sort of urban infrastructure, the energy systems that are needed to actually run the city. And in this particular example, we were using waste rice husks to allow the city to create its energy, some wind power, and some photovoltaic panels on the buildings for energy. But lots of cities can have different combinations. And then what you do is you design a building, so when you're living in a building, you can actually use much, much less energy, and we've then got enough supply of energy to come from renewable resources. So all of that is possible, but of course at the same time, we have to have some sort of framework to understand that. So if you want to understand the ecological age, I recommend you read this book if you haven't read it. It's called Biomimicry by a wonderful journalist called Janine Benyus. And this book is a wonderful description of how we can learn from the natural world about how it successfully inhabits the planet. And if we follow these sorts of principles, then actually we can make that transition. So I'm going to focus on a couple of them to give you some ideas about what you could do going forward next week and the week after, and I'm going to touch on one of them. Now, everywhere in the world, and this is very true in the UK at the moment, you'll find that people are now focusing on localism and local leadership. So do take advantage of that. At the summit that we had in Hong Kong, I was advocating that the government should find community leaders who really want to make this change happen. So go looking for your community leaders and become a community leader yourself to actually make this change happen. And there are many cities that are doing this already. So we've got to think about food, we've got to think about materials, we've got to think about water, and we've got to think about energy. And those are the things we've got to gather and use and manage really efficiently. I don't want to be very techie tonight, but I want to show you the history of the world in a single graph. This graph is the amount of energy per person that each country has used as it's grown its economy. And you can see that right now, Europe and Japan use about half as much energy as the United States and Australia, and that's mostly because of the low density of their cities and because of the amount of cars that are used and the energy in them. Now, in China, the trajectory of the government is to follow this line, which is actually, you'll see, is about half the energy consumption that's currently used in Europe, and the city I showed you earlier on was aiming on that line. But did you know that Hong Kong actually lies on that line? So actually Hong Kong is, in terms of its energy consumption per person, the sort of city that China wants to become. But of course you can do even better than that. And one of the big reasons for that is that your transport system is really good. Now, having roads in cities is crazy from an economics point of view, because what happens is you get cars sitting on roads going nowhere when you could have buses taking the same number of people and cyclists and people walking using tiny amounts of space, and that space could be used for economic activity. So roads in cities don't make any sense. And in Hong Kong, you do have roads, but you've got a fantastic public transport system, and that's why Hong Kong has a very, very specially low amount of energy used in transport, but your buildings are very inefficient. So if you could get your buildings to be much more efficient, then actually you'd be a leading city in the world in terms of energy efficiency. What sort of vehicles will come in the ecological age? Well, they will probably be electric, because one of the guiding principles about the ecological age is you should never burn anything. And the reason you should never burn anything is because you waste the heat. Electric cars don't burn things. They actually don't waste that heat. Therefore, they use a lot less energy. And therefore, everywhere I go in the world, electric vehicles are coming. So your lives, I reckon, will be ones where you use electric vehicles a lot. Now, if you don't believe this transition is happening, this is real. This isn't Photoshop. This is real. This is the city of Seoul that I think some of you come from. Are people here from Seoul? Hopefully, one or two. This road has been taken out, and this is an economics project. Taking this road out has improved the economics of Seoul. The businesses are thriving, and people who don't have much money can now travel into the city centre by walking and cycling along this river when they couldn't before. So actually it's an inclusion project as well. It brings everyone together. So this is actually happening. Now the final problem is food. Now you may not know that in about 1985, the amount of food we produce in the world on average per person started to go down, and it's going down every year. And as the population grows, we've got less food for everybody every year, and we have to solve that problem really quickly. And if there's any problem that we're facing, as well as climate change, food supply is going to be one of the biggest challenges in your lifetime. And the obvious way of solving that is to bring food production into cities. So this is now a great movement. So look around you where you live. Are there flat roofs that food could be grown on? Is there land where food could be grown? Because if that is available and it's possible, it is now a commercially viable thing to do, to actually help solve the problem. Now, the other thing we don't do, we don't take the wastewater from our cities and the waste that comes from sewage and waste food and all the nutrients, if you digest that, we don't take that back to farmland to help grow food. And in some of our projects in China where we've been developing new urban developments, we found if you do that, if you take the wastewater and the compost and nutrients from city waste and provide it to the farmers, you can lift agricultural production by a factor of 3 compared with what they have at the moment, which means that urbanism can lift food productivity rather than the opposite. So if we reconnect urban and rural systems, we can make it work as long as we manage water effectively at the same time. And those of you who come from Singapore will know that your government has just put in place the most amazingly efficient water gathering and recycling system, which is really inspiring.